Welcome to Schemes and Stones. I'm your host, Kyle, otherwise known as Coyote on the forums.
And I am your host, Brian, and I go by Davos on the forums.
Now, before we get into our episode for today, I want to thank our patrons very much. Thank you for helping us make this awesome content for you. Content like this podcast and our YouTube videos, which if you haven't seen any of those, there's a lot of Vassal games on there. And we also have the Building on a Budget series, which is a good introduction for new players, a guide to what to buy for different crews. And then, of course, we have a Facebook group, we have a Discord channel, and we have a blog that you can check out articles on. Now, on to the show. So today, Brian and I have a very special episode for you. But first off, Brian, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad. I just came off vacation. Pretty good time. So yeah. All right, well, people don't want to hear us talk about our lives. They want to hear about the content. So first off, I do have to read a small disclaimer. And that is, this material was provided for review by Wyrd Miniatures, and the views and opinions expressed throughout this content, this podcast that is, and YouTube video, are those of the authors, us at Schemes and Stones that is, and do not reflect the official policy, position, or opinion of Wyrd Miniatures. So everything we say as far as how we feel about it and what we think about it is all our opinion. So, you also may have heard this if you are a podcast listener, that I said YouTube here. So, I'm going to use this as my own disclaimer in that we're going to be simul-releasing a YouTube and a podcast of this. I would recommend, if you're not watching the YouTube, watch the YouTube, because we're going to have everything, pictures, cards, all that, as video. So you can see that while we talk about it. But if you do not, we'll have links in the show notes and that sort of thing otherwise. So, without further ado, let's see that first picture of the title card. We have Charles Hoffman, inventor. So, as far as the picture goes, a lot of lightning going on there.
Yeah, it's like they took the regular Hoffman card and then just gave him a cooler mech suit, and now he controls lightning. It's like a Tesla coil. It's like he's walking around with one of those, kind of. It's super sick.
Exactly. As for the actual card, though, here you go. So, Hoffman has changed a little bit. My way of explaining it is, whereas previously he was a support buff master, he is now more of a debuff master. So he kind of flipped roles. But as far as things that didn't change, for those of you that are familiar with the previous version, he still has armor 2. He still has power converter, which is he can use power tokens to get suits or get plus flips as per usual. Those are the two things that stayed the same. Everything else on the card is new or different in some way, shape, or form. So, starting with general toughness, I think he is a little bit tougher. I think he has one more wound from the previous version.
Yeah, he's got extra wound,
better stats.
Yeah, like he's not defense 4 anymore, so he actually has a little bit of frontline potential.
Yeah, I mean, he can be on the front line maybe a little bit better, although he still doesn't need to be by any means. My big takeaway, okay, there's two big takeaways here, and it's on the right side of the card. First off, he's move 5, which is a pretty big deal. Now that he can move 5 versus 4. That actually makes him a regular movement model and not just a slow poke. And then the second one is size 3, and then if you look on the back, or you'll see the other side of the card, 50 millimeter. So he's a 50 millimeter base now. He's massive.
He's a big boy.
Yep.
Which presumably it seems like his construct mech suit might have gotten a couple upgrades and tweaks, and now is more peacekeeper scale, potentially. Like, that's really cool.
Yeah, hopefully the model fills the base adequately.
Oh, yeah.
So it looks impressive. So as far as his new shtick, if you will, it's all about arc nodes. Now, this is going to be so confusing for people coming in and listening to old episodes, because we used to refer to arc nodes for like Raspy and stuff like that, because that was a war machine term. But now there actually are arc nodes, because that's what he does. So now people are going to be a little confused. But anyways, Arc nodes are his new kind of gimmick, and it's a terrain, or not even, well, it is train because it does have train traits, I guess. It's a marker, though, with train traits, but blocking impassable, and this is how you give out power tokens now. Instead of Hoffman pulsing, or not even pulsing it, I guess you can think of it as like a pulse. Now it's when they start. So it's when they start. It's not Hoffman. So Hoffman doesn't have to go first to give everybody power tokens now. They just have to start next to a pylon marker, and they'll gain shielded and a power token. So this does a couple things. One, shielded with armor 2 makes things really hard to kill.
It's so good. Like, oh god, I love it. I love it so much.
It's a 3-inch aura, and you start with 4 of these. So you can spread them out. So inevitably you're going to have one next to like your starting clump, or 2 next to your starting clumps if you want to spread out, which is nice because before Hoffman kind of wanted to ball up to make sure everybody got their first token. And then from there, you may not want to keep them together. But now they can actually go separate ways because you can just have these nodes spread out farther apart. It is a little telegraphing as to where you're going because you want to start one next to your guys, and you probably want to put one where you're going to be moving your guys. But let's be honest, it's Hoffman. He's not exactly, I'm going to trick you where I'm going. No, he's just going to plod towards the middle and fight you.
Hoffman is very subtle. He never telegraphs what he's doing, ever.
Sure.
Ever. And then, important thing to note with these pylons is not only are they height 4 impassable, doesn't say anything about destructible, which means they are not destructible, which means they're stuck on that table until someone comes up with a way to remove them with like specialty rules, or Hoffman himself removes them.
Which is interesting. One, you could block yourself in if you're not clever, or you just place them without thinking. So don't do that because you have a lot of big bases, or you probably have a lot of big bases. It depends on what kind of list you're bringing. But on the reverse side, if the opponent is playing against Hoffman, man, they really want to bring marker removal depending on the strategy. Unless this changes, everything is subject to change. But if this doesn't change, you can block symbols where they can't physically get to them unless they can remove markers.
Yeah. On certain board states, in conjunction with like the existing terrain and then these, you can just fully block out markers, which is really good. It's a really good way to win games, not have to worry about defending a symbol marker, let's say, because you just do it with the train and the table. Makes it much easier to focus on scoring points yourself.
Yeah. My only disclaimer here is I'm fine with leaving it as not destructible if everybody has access to marker removal. Problem is, we haven't seen these new models and all these new masters, so maybe that is the case. Maybe people do get access. But last I checked, like Neverborn, the faction I'm currently playing, doesn't have a way to get rid of markers. So we're kind of SOL.
You have flight, though.
Yeah, but you can physically place it where I can't get in base contact with it. So I can't get the symbol.
Well, you should
beg people to give us an ability to let me remove a marker.
It's fine. But it's really cool. So with the pylons, when you would remove a pylon, Hoffman gets to drop a scrap marker next to it, which is just like good for his crew, because the power converter to remove scrap to get more power tokens, blah, blah, blah. It's the whole augmented shtick. We all know about it. But when this happens, when you drop a scrap marker because the pylon is getting removed, enemy models just have to take move duels or take damage. So it's nice little like passive bits of damage just to like, oh, flip a card. Did you hit a fairly high number on a move stat? Take 2 damage. And that your opponent doesn't really get to do anything with, because removing the pylons is generally Hoffman controlled. Though I suppose if their opponent is doing it, then they have to like spend an action or an ability to remove it and then proc a duel they have to defend against. It's really nice.
Yeah, I think the duel is kind of like
icing.
It combos with one of his other abilities a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's more icing on the cake. The scrap marker is really nice, though. The fact that you're like, hey, if they do get rid of it, you still have something out of it, which is definitely nice. So, as far as the back of the card, so what is Hoffman actually doing during his turns? So, I think what he's primarily going to be doing, he's a little more offensive now, whereas before he was mostly healing and making things fast. Now he's probably going to start by doing a bunch of alternating current, and then he's going to start getting into the fight himself. As far as alternating current, it's a pretty flexible ability. It lets him be offensive or defensive, or I guess supporty if he wants to be. Offensively speaking, it's just irreducible damage, which is really good.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. Realistically, you're never going to be doing more than probably 2, I would think.
Yeah, you shouldn't.
Yeah, you shouldn't be really doing more than 2.
Yeah, because it's damage based on the number of pylons within 6 inches, I think, of the target. It's a max of 3. So, like...
It can do 4.
Yeah. But, like, you really should never, ever be taking more than 2 damage as the opponent, unless, like, you messed up.
You made bad choices in life.
Yeah, like, I'm looking at, are there extra ways for...
Yeah, he can move pylons.
He can... Oh, yeah, with bulldoze. And then security defenses, because bulldoze lets him create them, and he can push them around. It's like, in order for, like, the dream of the 4 damage, which isn't a flip, it just, like, it happens. It's 4 irreducible. Yeah, which is quite strong.
Well, they still have it's still resistant.
Right, yeah, like, they take the duel, they fail the duel, they take 4 damage, but it's very telegraphed. If, like, it's a lot of moving parts to make it happen. Realistically, 2, I think, is a safe bet, which is still really good. 12-inch range, 2 irreducible damage. Pretty nice.
Yeah. But I think what you're really using it for is it's probably your turn 1 play. Instead of where you're making everything fast, you're basically pinging your own guys. So what you're doing is you're power spiking, which is the once, or I guess you can only do it once per turn. So you could do it. Okay, so it's not as good. So the alternative is like, yeah, turn 1, you are going to be using it. Well, you're probably going to be using it every
You
turn.
still use it because, like, turn 1, barring like a hyper aggressive opponent, like, you're playing against Nekoma. Okay, you're probably going to be in the thick of it right away. You still ping 1 damage to one of your models and pulse out a power token to everyone within 3 of the inventor.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you do that because power tokens are incredibly strong and useful for this crew. It's a built-in trigger, so it literally costs you nothing to do this.
Yeah. So generally, you're going to be turn 1, pinging, pick a model, it doesn't matter, doing 1 damage to it, giving everybody power tokens, so they're going to have 2 to start with effectively. And then I think your bigger ball, whatever it ends up being, will probably continue getting extra tokens from this. It'll eventually start being enemy models that are taking it, but it'll start with friendlies. Even with Hoffman not healing, you still have lots of healing. You have your totem for first off can do the healing, but you also have like a toolkit. You also have steam fitters if you take them, like yada, yada, yada.
You have, and we'll talk about this model in a little bit, but the new model coming out has a very cute synergy with this that just negates the damage completely and gives you extra insane utility. So you basically get to do the power spike, at least on turn 1, when you don't need to worry about counterplay from your opponent, at literally no cost. You just have to, like, spend an action, which I guess is the cost.
So turns 1, he's alternating current, and then later turns, he's probably doing this still once every round. As far as other AP, well, he's probably moving up the board a little more because he can actually move with a decent walk. But he now has Construction Claws, which is a 2-inch reach attack, which is super nice. So now he has a long range, can tie things up. It's only a 2/4/5, but it auto places anywhere within 2 inches. So technically can be min 3 if you have some vent steaming going, which obviously you have that access to that. But probably more importantly, though, is the electroshock. The crow trigger is awesome.
It's so good. Pulse 2 gains stunned and injured 1. Discard power token. So, like, that's costly. But I can very much see a play where, like, turn 3, you just YOLO sprint Hoffman into the center of the opponent's crew and pulse out stunned and injured 1 to, like, 2 or 3 models. A 50 mil and then pulse 2 off that. Like, that's a huge area just to say, you get an injured, you get an injured. And then all of your big scary stuff, Peacekeeper, gets even more scary.
Yeah, and just think about how if you want to frontline Hoffman, if like Assassinate, for example, is not in the pool, or something you're not worried about, if Hoffman dies, he dies, it's whatever, he can go in first, hit somebody, throw him on the opposite side of him, and then stun and injure him, and then basically just like, here you go, guys, go at him.
Yep. This is how you kill Zoraida. Run in, punch her. Whoop, she's stunned. Throw her out of her swamp. And then the Peacekeeper cuts her head off. Done.
Or like Colette, because when she's stunned, she can't fade away. Things like that. So he's going to be a lot more offensive as far as punching things and kind of setting up for kills. As far as other abilities, he has one more tactical action, which we mentioned, Bulldoze. So this is a movement-based thing. It's kind of like the Emissary, the Bayou one, where it can just roll over things. It's the same idea, where he basically pushes his move in any direction, he ignores everything when he does it, and then anything he moved over marker-wise just gets eliminated, and it changes the scrap marker, basically. So, and then, of course, enemies that are moved through have to take duels or gain damage and staggered, that sort of stuff. But mostly you're using it to get rid of markers. This is another way to get rid of markers, which is nice.
And then you have a trigger just to, like, make pylons if you remove a marker. And, like, if you desperately need a pylon for some reason, you could have someone, like, drop a scheme marker in your path. You know, like, if you have to do it to win the game, you know, you figure out a way to do it. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, you're engaged. Bulldoze out. And then interact and score a point and win the game. You know, like, the utility on it is just crazy good. It's denial. You know, you can pick up any of the, like, train creation masters, Titania, Sonia, Karis, you know, whoever. You can deny schemes. You can just use it to position him. Like, oh, I'm going to run through this wall. I'm going to Kool-Aid Man. It's so good. I love it.
And slight idiot proofing in case you block yourself in on accident. You can run over your pylon marker and get rid of it.
Oh, yeah, that too. It's hard to think things through in the beginning of the game, you know?
I mean, I've done it plenty of times where I've made silly mistakes like that. And then finally, he has his bonus action, and this is where we were talking about earlier. You just basically push your pylon markers 3 inches any direction, essentially, but you also then put a ski marker down. So you can basically use these things as ski marker dropping engines of sorts.
12 inches.
12-inch with a 3-inch push and the marker placement.
So, like, at deployment for arc nodes, you have to place it on your table half. But then, let's say you pick one of these pylons and turn 1, you push it, and it's already on your opponent's side. And then you can, like, just leave your mark. Do I have it? Do I not have it? You don't have it anymore because I just dumped a marker right here for you. And then if you have enemy models near it, you can just use the built-in crow trigger to blow up the pylon, which draws you a card, and then drops a scrap, which means whoever's around it has to take that movement, duel, or take damage. It's very efficient.
Yeah, it's basically just a free ski marker every round. Like, there's no reason you shouldn't be doing it, either just to reposition your pylon or, again, just to drop extra ski markers to threaten things. And yeah, that 12-inch reach, like, it lets you get markers in places that your opponent wouldn't necessarily expect unless, obviously, they played against this version of Hoffman.
Yeah, it's so good.
So, overall verdict on this Hoffman, do you think he is... Well, let's go with this. Do you think he's going to see more play, less play, or about the same as current Hoffman?
So, I haven't heard much about Hoffman getting played in... Even, like, GG1, I think he saw some play, but in GG2, I have not really heard anything about him. It seems like GG2 is more scheme control based, not so much like pure killy like GG1 is. GG2 feels a little more control, scheme based, and I feel like he does that pretty well. So I'm gonna lean towards that he's gonna see more play.
I'm going to lean towards, I think the original will see more play, but this one's going to come out for very specific pools where you can really abuse the fact that they're not destructible. I think there are going to be some tables and pools that it's going to be brutal to play against this. So I think overall, though, making things fast is probably just better, though.
Yeah, that is a big downside. You're giving up 3 AP on 2 to 3 models,
Yeah.
and you're giving up potentially the "you can't ignore my armor this turn" ability, which is like really important because obviously, like, oh, my opponent declared Hoffman. Let's pull open the app and check every ignores armor attack I have in faction to see which one of these models I can bring in without breaking the bank too. Like, it's gonna happen. So you would obviously use that ability all the time, and losing that hurts. But it does open you up to a more scheme-based plan than the typical, like, Hoffman's crew Zerg rush the center and exists.
I don't even necessarily, if it's scheming, it changes. I think it more changes that he can spread out. So if you bring this list, you have the capability of spreading out more. So if you do need to fight on multiple fronts, or say the board is just really bad for a lot of 50 millimeter bases, but maybe there's multiple paths, but you'd have to spread out to take them. You can take this version, now you can spread out and you won't be as hindered. Whereas previously, you'd probably have one side that's just going to falter and the other side will hold up.
Right. Can I kill you fast enough before you flank me?
Yeah. All right. So Hoffman is now done. Let's look at the next master, and you'll see it right there.
Oh.
Von Schill stole Talos's body.
Yeah. So, Von Schill, my OG, I love him, learned to play with him, and they took him, and I kind of view it as a combination of, like, they turned him into a mechanical Sith Lord. He looks kind of like Star Wars-y to me.
Yeah, now that you say that.
The face mask. But, like Kyle, you said, they gave him a Talos body, but not, like, as chonky as the Talos mod. Like, this is like if Talos worked out every day for 15 hours and got ripped and had a magnificent mane of hair. So Von Schill Ironheart, he's just so cool. And the immediate thing that stands out with him is they're reintroducing an ability that was in M2E, which is Instinctual, which lets this model take 2 different bonus actions during the activation, which, as our informed listeners know, Von Schill has all these equipment upgrades that have pretty good bonus actions. And he also now has Foul Mouth Motivation. So you can get like a leaping Von Schill who heals Eric, who went charging forward into the enemy, and gives him focus all at the same time. It's super great. I'm so excited for this model.
There, of course, you see the new card with both sides of that. And I think he's basically a more efficient version of what he was before, is kind of how I see it.
Yeah. He's more aggressive, I think.
Yes, he's a lot more aggressive than he was. I think he just gains a lot of efficiencies. Whereas before, if you were trying to set up the equipment, it seemed like you were just doing it wrong. Now he just kind of does it as a trigger off of doing something else that he wants to do.
Right.
So he may be a little more stone heavy, but
yeah, it becomes this engine, because it used to be like he was equipping these upgrades and spending cards to do it, and it was just this kind of like Rube Goldberg. It was worth it sometimes, but it also sometimes wasn't. So he has a built-in trigger on his bonus action, which just automatically equips an upgrade to him. And that's a built-in trigger. He needs a 6 for Foul Mouth Motivation, which just gives focus to a model. And the Frycore love focus. Hannah and Eric adore focus, because then they can hit that sweet 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 damage threshold with Hannah. And then he has pass off. So when he discards an equipment upgrade, you can then toss that equipment upgrade to a different Frycore model. and that model gains the upgrade and shielded. And then you have armor and shielded stacking on models, which is just phenomenal. Like we talked about with Hoffman, obviously armor 2 is better than armor 1, but armor 1 and shielded, like that's going to let you take some hits. And there's already a lot of healing in the Frycore, so it stacks really well.
Well, actually, that same trigger on the bonus is also on his melee attack, so he can do it as melee too, if he just happens to hit it. I mean, maybe you'll stone for it. It just depends on if you want it or not.
And that's where, like, the biggest damage threshold. So he's losing diving charge, which is a little disappointing because with the new, like, Talos Darth Vader mech suit they gave him,
it's too heavy to dive, Brian.
Yeah, but like if they gave him diving charge, it's the perfect, oh yeah, busting through walls moment, and he actually is Mr. Kool-Aid Man. And then they would have like completely taken my advice in how to like change the model, and I could say I designed a model in Malifaux, but they're not letting me do that. But they gave him a 2-inch reach, which is obviously great, and they just increased his damage potential. Min 3, 4, 6 with the adaptive armor gives himself some equipment, and then blasting on that melee, which is not common, but seems really nice.
So you're going to have a crew full of beat sticks now.
Oh yeah, like really aggressive.
I also like that. I think this is a nod towards Brian specifically and his fact that he's terrifying duels.
I was gonna call that out. He's ruthless, baby!
I think they specifically gave him ruthless because they know Brian is terrible at flipping those duels.
And not just me, like in general, but specifically with my Frycore crews who have multiple Willpower 7 models. And for the life of me, I could not flip a 3 to get around terrifying 10 in multiple games. Like, it's on record. It's terrible.
Well, now you don't even have to flip a card.
And now he just gets to ignore it because he's a badass. I'm all for it. I'm very excited.
Exactly. So not only does he ignore terrifying manipulative, but he also ignores stun now. So he can't be stunned, which is really nice because his instinctual would suck if he got stunned.
Right, yeah, I think like they kind of had to give that to him. Like certain crews and factions are really good at giving out stunned. They had to give it to him, otherwise, like if you stun him, not only is he sad because he has like good triggers, obviously, but then it's like a full, fifth of my card doesn't work anymore, and that feels bad.
Yeah. So, as far as other abilities, he has, we'll say it's Soldier Capitan.
That sounds right. We'll hear about it in the comments, I'm sure.
Yeah.
How we're wrong. I had originally read this, I'm like, oh, that's cool, like, they ignore their friendly fire. If, like, he's in and they're shooting at the thing. No, it's better than that. It's just they ignore any minus to their attack actions, targeting enemy models engaged by this model. Oh, I'm distracted. Nah, it's fine. Oh, they're in concealment. Nah, it's fine. Oh, they have the discard a card or take a minus. Nah, it's fine. It's so good. I just assumed it was like, oh, they ignore friendly fire. It's better than that. It's a phenomenal ability.
Yeah. I wonder if they're like, oh, we didn't intend that. Subject to change. Let's change that. But we'll see.
I'll be so sad if I just outed that. Oh, no. Now you have me second guessing myself. Thanks, Kyle.
No problem. As far as the other abilities on the back of the card, he has Bulldoze like Hoffman does, so they both can do that push and get rid of markers. So you now have another way to get rid of markers. You have access to scrap markers, which, do you really use scrap markers? I mean...
So, Ashes and Dust does, in faction. Other than that, not really, but there is some construct synergy with the new model. So the model that's Frycore augmented has some scrap construct synergy. That's where this comes in.
Okay.
I personally would like to see more scrap synergy just to like make it a little more useful, but honestly, you're not using Bulldoze to generate the scrap marker. You're using it to remove the marker you're removing.
Well, honestly, I think in this case, Bulldoze is used with Sudden Strike if you have a 5 of Rams or better to basically get a free move.
Yep.
I think that's more often what it's going to be used for. Whereas Hoffman doesn't really use it. He doesn't have any bonus actual actions attached to it. I feel like Von Shield's going to Kool-Aid Man through a wall and then
Yeah.
punch something, and you're just like,
Yeah,
what?
but like Bulldoze really is incredibly similar to Diving Charge. It's only just like I need a TN of 5 on it. And if you're going to use it like Diving Charge, you're just going to stone for it and get the extra attack, and you're going to bust through a wall and hit someone real bad. But the other attack action, Explosive Payload, it's a shockwave, and everyone knows shockwaves are awful. This one, I think, has a ton of potential. Really, really unique. So it ignores line of sight, which some shockwaves do, but its special ability is any model that gets damaged by it, they take extra damage from pulses and blasts. Which means his built-in sweeping strike trigger, like, let's say I blast on moderate damage. I am dealing 4 damage to my target and 4 damage to anything within blast of that model. Or I do 6 and I deal 5 in blast. That's insane. The even bigger synergy is Hannah is like the big blaster in the game, arguably, if you can stack it up right. Because with her blasting, and if she copies Eric's bonus action for extra damage, you could do, I believe, 6 damage moderate blast with Hannah if the enemies around have also failed explosive payload. It's pretty nasty.
Yeah, and then obviously it combos with Lazarus because he's doing shockwaves as well. So it gives him a pseudo buff as far as that goes. It buffs up the grenade belt, I believe, is the shockwave one.
Yeah. I had forgotten about the grenade belt.
Yeah, so I mean, you have access to multiple shockwaves, so it buffs a few different things. Honestly, I think the best use of this, though, is you really, really want severe injury on the trigger. And we should also note that it's defense 14. It's not a low duel. This is a defense 14 duels. It's pretty high.
Yeah, it's once per turn. So, like, you got to make it count. But I can see this very much as, like, if you can hit 2-3 models with this, I think you stone and you cheat the crow in. And they have to cheat that duel. Yeah, they take 1 damage, whatever, but injured and then bonus damage on everything that the Frycore bring against them. At that point, Lazarus becomes, like, playable and terrifying. Because he's defense 13, and it would become 4 damage.
4 damage shockwaves, yeah. Feels a little overkill, but, like, if you could do it, like, man, it's just gonna shred a crew.
I'm wondering if this is what makes Lazarus, like, actually consistently see, like, well, not even consistently, just see play. Because he does not see play ever.
I think that's the intent.
It's gotta be.
Because, especially with his alt sculpt, he's such a cool looking model.
And the new one that, like, just came out, the alt sculpt is sick. The new sculpt also looks really cool. Like, they're really incredibly awesome model that should see play, but it doesn't because you have a ton of expensive models, and, like, Hannah's probably a better take.
Yeah, I think you just can't afford with his eliteness.
Yeah.
So I personally don't know if explosive payload's going to see play, but it has some interesting tricks you could do with it. The other thing you got to keep in mind, it is not a gun icon, so he can do it while engaged or in melee. So that also has some play with it. He can just, like, pulse injure things around him or something. Because friendly Frycorp, ignore it.
Yeah, so he could just do it on himself. Yeah.
So he's like holding a grenade and blowing it up next to himself or whatever.
Right. And he also gives out the rocket launchers. So what he could do is if he's already in range, he could explosive payload something. He could foul mouth motivation Eric, who's sitting next to him, which attaches an upgrade to him. He shoots off the rocket launcher at the things that he just explosive payload. Well, that discards the rocket launcher, which then he tosses to the Frycore scout that's 4 inches to his left, who then now gets a rocket launcher, which gets to ignore a bunch of things because the scout inherently ignores cover and concealment, if I remember correctly. And then they are shooting off a 2-3-4 rocket launcher with crit strike with +1 damage on the blast. And it has blasts across the entire board. There's like really, really strong potential here for some just stupid combos. Not necessarily incredibly competitive,
But fun.
right? Very fun. Or just give out injured and then watch things die.
Yeah. So, thoughts on seeing play? Will he see more, less, the same as current Von Schill?
I think a lot more. I think Ironheart is the go-to Von Schill unless you have a pool that really favors a Don't Mind Me diving charge Von Schill. Current Von Schill, he's a little more defensive because you're losing a stat of defense and you're losing a movement stat and a willpower stat as well. So if you need like a symbols runner, OG Von Schill just scores an entire game's worth of symbols points uncontested when you give him Don't Mind Me. But if you need anything that's not heavy scheming from the Frycore, you do this, and you're gonna just eviscerate your opponent.
I think this one's going to see more play. I don't know if it's necessarily going to be a lot more. I mean, it'll be a lot more at first because everybody's going to want to
Oh, of
play
course.
this version. But I think this one will see a little bit more just because it's a little more straightforward. And like I said, the other one, while good, has more niche circumstances where this guy, I think, is going to be more generally useful. I will say Von Schill's in a really great spot now because when you declare Von Schill, I think both options are pretty viable into a lot of pools. So, like, you really don't know which one's necessarily going to come.
Yeah, I think the original one became better because this one came out, because they do have a very distinct play style. Like, if I say Von Schill, legitimately, it is a coin flip, and they have distinct play styles. So, as an opponent, you legitimately have to, like, ooh, what do I think they're gonna do? Whereas the Hoffman split of do I think this one or that one's gonna see, I feel like that's an easier distinction on how you anticipate as the opponent. Von Schill's, I don't think you can do that.
Yeah, I don't think you can guess. You have to assume that either of them can go into play. All right, so stay tuned for 1 second, and boom. There you go. We have the new Metallurgist.
Yeah, this is the new dual keyword enforcer coming out for Augmented and Frycore. Looks really cool. They're very much going with that like electromagnetic feel that they're giving Hoffman, and like it just looks really cool. I like the art a lot.
Well, here's the actual card so you can see that.
Has a bunch of like pretty unique abilities going on with the card. So the one that'll jump out to you immediately, enhanced steel. Armor ability may reduce things to 0 if it's hazardous damage, and then blast, pulses, and shockwaves, which aren't as important. The hazardous damage, though, is important.
I actually think all, because one of the ways you could decimate, at least for Hoffman, for Von Schill, I don't think it's as important, but for Hoffman, I've been obliterated by hazardous terrain and shockwave lists. Things like that can tear through you because just the ping damage.
So like hazardous, I think is the one it's actually super useful on. The rest is just like nice. I've never really encountered heavy shockwave, pulse, or blast. That Pandora game with Daw, that was like the biggest pulse crew I've ever really faced against.
Well, we'll just make you play against that stupid Wong list that Goodman made.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I should not have said anything. Whereas like the hazardous terrain, there's a lot of hazardous just like on boards or like builds you can do with multiple different factional masters. And just like, nah, I don't take any damage from your hazardous just feels incredibly good.
Mm-hmm. And it has Arcane Shield, so it's going to potentially have 3 shielded if you're playing the new Hoffman. But otherwise, it's still going to be shielded. So 6 wound shielding means it passes the Parker test, so it doesn't just get shot off. Now, it is a little more expensive than the models we've talked about up to this point. It also does not take any shockwave or pulse or blast damage. It just reduces all that damage to 0, which I don't know. I think the spiders do that, I want to say. I think that's maybe it.
I think Sparks is evasive. There's a couple.
This is important because it can hide behind the big models and not get shockwaved, blasted, etc.
Whoa, there's a lot of evasive models.
Oh, I didn't realize there were so many.
Yeah, Wong, obviously. Sparks, Angel Eyes, Dr. Bebe. You can technically count Tuco, Bloodwretch, and Maurice as models, and Angel Eyes. Those are models that have evasive.
Fair. They do have it, and they are models.
Right. You can hide behind a big, beefy model, so not having to worry about it is nice.
And then share power is nice if you're playing traditional Hoffman, especially because Hoffman, in that case, only gives out power tokens to constructs, and this gal is not a construct. So this at least makes it so it can generate power tokens of its own volition. So essentially, it just has to be next to other constructs, which is going to happen, I think, in both lists.
In Frycore, you have effectively 3 constructs, 4 if you count Lazarus, and the Steam Trunk. So you have a bunch of construct synergy there. I mean, the plus flip is nice, but the important one is the suit, which leads us over to her bonus actions, which I think is the primary reason you're bringing this model. So you have the Light Clockwork, which is a tactical action, and it pushes a target 3 inches towards either scrap or a construct. So it's like a little bonus action 3-inch move. The keyword specific triggers for augmented get a power token, which is always good. But then the Frycore, if you discard a card, you get an equipment upgrade. And equipment upgrades are really good. Then they also have Command Construct, which doesn't have the built-in tome, but share power lets you bake in that tome as needed. So you just need a 9, which is expensive, but you get an obey. Built-in heal 1 and armor cannot be ignored on the target.
Yeah, now the cool thing is this applies for both sides, so this gives you a way to not have armor ignored on the Frycorp side of things, which did not exist previously.
Yep, I see this, and Eric suddenly becomes really scary. Because, like, the turn you want to send him in, you heal him to full, say his armor can't be ignored, Von Schill gives him focus. You already obeyed him, so he walks or focuses, so he gets max 2 focus. And then you throw him into the opponent's crew and say, fight me. And an armor 2 Eric that cannot be ignored, that wrecks crews. I'm very excited for this.
I mean, there are ways to get around it, but yeah, it definitely makes him a lot more of a problem. So I think for the Hoffman side of things, I don't necessarily know if those are the highlight things. Command Construct is definitely good, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
And you generally have access to a lot more power tokens. So you're going to be able to get plus flips out of this guy for other things besides just commanding constructs. Being able to obey a Peacekeeper, we all know, is obviously good. Or Langston, if you want to try to get more executes, that sort of thing. But I think maybe the better thing is with Vent Steam, because previously you needed Langston. And I think that's why a lot of people took Langston in the Hoffman list, is for Vent Steam. But being able to vent steam with a 6-point model that you don't mind going with early necessarily, depending on circumstances, obviously, is pretty useful at times. And as we mentioned before, with Hoffman being able to automatically place things, it makes Hoffman min 3. So Hoffman then goes to a 3-5-6 damage track, which becomes a lot scarier when all of a sudden Hoffman's starting to hit like a real truck.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the vent steam is not to be ignored. Then electrical shock is decent. It's arm ignoring. It's moving things around if you want to move enemies around, which always got its uses.
It occurred to me, vent steam in OG Von Schill, you just keep tossing things into the vent steam cloud, does extra damage, they get shot. But Eric has, on his bonus action when he spools up to do extra damage, part of that bonus action lets him push things. So vent steam or any hazardous terrain makes him min 4. So if you live the dream and you metallurgist vent steam, you can then also drop a pit trap marker with Rusty Alice, who is also a construct.
Who's commonly on that list.
Yes. And then Eric runs in bonus actions and pushes something that like Von Schill already threw there. He hits min 5. Again, telegraphed, but a really efficient way to like nuke through a big beater. Could be fun.
Yeah, or I mean, can you throw them on top of like your detonate chart? Like you can do the landmines? Yeah, the landmines.
Oh, yeah, you could do Vent Steam, Landmines, Pit Trap Marker. And you could land in all 3 of them with just 3 damage and injured 1.
Again, a lot of setup and may not be practical in a competitive game.
Yeah, but oh boy, would it be fun.
Well, yeah, not fun to have it done to you.
Well, for one person.
Yeah, I think this model overall will see play. I think it's more of a matchup dependent pick personally, especially from the Hoffman side of things. Like if you think they can hit you with a lot of shockwaves, pulses, blast, hazardous terrain, that sort of thing, it's probably coming in because that alone is going to be worth its cost. Which the bad games I've had with Hoffman have been because somebody has abused usually one of those methods, pinging me 1,000 times. So I think that's when it comes out. Otherwise, I don't know if you would bring it. The Vent Steam is nice, but I don't think it's required. I think you still probably bring Langston instead, as far as Hoffman's side of things. Von Schill, do you think you bring this?
I think it's kind of the same. Like, you're bringing it for a very specific reason. You want to meme with the Vent Steam Hazardous Dream, or you think you're gonna be facing hazardous terrain, or if you want that hyper-aggressive Eric turn. Or Hannah, but probably Eric. But generally speaking, I don't know what this model is doing consistently. Like, I can give it upgrades to let it leap, but it's not really tanky or super survivable to scheme on its own. And I don't really want it using its electrical shock, because then it's going to die, and it's not necessarily doing a ton of work for me. And Vent Steam is nice, but it walks forward Vent Steam's command constructs, and he does that for 4 turns. That doesn't feel super great. So I think she is a tech pick.
All right, well, that's all we got for you as far as our reveals. I hope you enjoyed looking at these new cards and you're excited to see these. I know Brian is going to have Von Schill on the table ASAP.
Whoa. You don't know that. Maybe I'm prepping a Daw Parker best friends list. You don't know.
Maybe, but he's probably going to be playing this
tomorrow. Yes.
Yes. Hoffman, I'll probably give it a try. Definitely looks good in certain circumstances, so I think it's going to be super powerful. But I'm also playing Neverborn right now, so I need to see those other ones. Speaking of other models, so if you want to listen to more content as far as title cards, you should check out the Capital City podcast. I hear they're going to be doing a release relatively soon. So how do you feel about buried models?
Buried models, I don't mind them. I'm an Outcast player, so I have a lot of ways to abuse that, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, that's all we're going to say for that one, so stay tuned. It'll be out soon.
Thanks for listening, and Wyrd, thank you very much for allowing us to do this. It was very cool.
Yeah.
So that's the end of the show today. If you liked what you heard, leave us a review. You can also find more content or conversation on the Schemes and Stones blog or the Schemes and Stones Discord channel. Also, if you have any questions, comments, you can find us on Facebook or send a message to the Schemes and Stones email linked in the show notes.